آی دکتر. خب ایشون هم آن میوت هستن، بقیه رو
خودتون آن میوت کنید خانم دکتر.
درست شد. Good evening. Welcome to PUYA, Professional Organization of Iranian Americans in Atlanta. One of the missions of PUYA is to honor, pay tribute, or remember our Iranian American scholars, scientists, and dignitaries who have made a difference in the world. Tonight, we are going to start with a tribute to Dr. Firuza Naderi, our world-renowned NASA and Jet Propulsion Laboratory scholar and scientist, where he contributed to some robotic space missions. Unfortunately, he went to eternity on June 2023. Then I will continue with announcing the next two programs of our Persian Cultural Center, following it with the introduction of our eminent scholar and psychiatrist, Dr. Zhabiz Kazeminejad, to whom I am indebted for having accepted our invitation. I also owe gratitude to Dr. Camelia Alavi for having made this opportunity available for us. Doctor, if you give me, I can share screen. Okay. Remembering Dr. Firuza Naderi. Dr. Firuza Naderi, Professional Organization of Iranian Americans in Atlanta. Dr. Firuza Naderi, late Dr. Firuza Naderi. Another picture of Dr. Naderi. Dr. Firuza Naderi, a beacon of brilliance and wisdom, has passed away, leaving a legacy that will forever inspire us. Firuza Naderi, NASA official who put rovers on Mars, dies at 77. The mission vastly expanded human understanding of the red planet and Washington Post. Dr. Firuza Naderi was paralyzed from the neck down after an accident on May 24th, 2023, which he explained in his Facebook account. I had a sudden low heartbeat that made me pass out and strike my head against the wall, causing one of my vertebrae in my neck to protrude into the nerve canal, causing total paralysis below my neck. Surgery was done on neck on Monday. A difficult rehab of 4 to 5 months is ahead of me, which is only possible with support from friends and the love of my family. Firuza Naderi. Unfortunately, on June 9, this great world-renowned scientist went to eternity. Dr. Firuza Naderi, 1946 to 2023. Tributes pour in as Firuza Naderi passes away. The internet was flooded with tributary messages after the news of Naderi's passing came to light, the Iran Post. Dr. Firuza Naderi's short biography. Born in Shiraz, 1946, elementary and high school education in Tehran, 1964, BS Electrical Engineering, Iowa State University, USA, 1969. MS and PhD in Electrical Engineering, University of California, 1972. NASA's JPL Communication System Engineer, 1979. NASA Headquarters Advanced Communications Technology Satellite. NASA Project Manager, NASA Scatterometer. NASA awarded him the Outstanding Leadership Medal for his management of the above project. Manager of Origins Project, NASA's ambitious technology-rich plan to search for Earth-like planets in other planetary systems. Wikipedia. NASA's Program Manager of Mars Exploration, 2000 to 2005, successful landing of the Mars exploration rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, for which he received NASA Distinguished Service Medal. JPL's first Associate Director for Project Formulation and Strategy, Director of Solar System Exploration, served on many philanthropic organizations, board member of Iranica Encyclopedia. This is said by Dr. Firuza Naderi. Being Persian is part of my history, and being an American is part of my identity, and the two are irretrievably intermixed. How blessed I am to be rooted in ancient civilization with a rich culture, and at the same time, a proud American living in this young nation that has lifted me on her shoulders, allowing me to reach for the stars. Here's another. Recognitions and awards of Dr. Firuza Naderi. Fellow of the American Institute of Aeronautics, NASA Outstanding Leadership Medal, Space Technology Hall of Fame Medal, 1997, Ellis Island Medal of Honor, 2005, NASA Distinguished Service Medal, 2005, Theodore von Karman Mission Excellence Award, 2007, William Randolph Lovelace II Award, 2010, Great Immigrants, the Pride of Americas by Carnegie Corporation of New York, 2015, Asteroid 1989 EL1, renamed Asteroid 5515 Naderi, 2016. Inducted into Iowa State University's Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Engineering Hall of Fame, 2022. Distinguished Alumni Signal and Image Processing Institute, SIPI, University of Southern California. We Iranians are proud to have had a world-renowned scholar. On behalf of the board of the Professional Organization of Iranian Americans in Atlanta, I express my deepest and heart-wrenching condolences to his family, NASA, and the entire world for having lost a genius scientist who accomplished so much for humanity during his lifetime. His memory will be with us eternally. We Iranians are proud to have had a world-renowned scholar who put his entire life at the service of humanity. Alas, that he has left this mundane world, but his achievements will keep his memory alive forever and ever after. People of wisdom and achievement never die. Okay. Now I'm going to announce the future programs of Kanun in Farsi. سه‌شنبه 4 جولای کانون به دلیل تعطیلات 4 ژوئیه برنامه نداریم. سه‌شنبه 10 جولای فیلم خرس نیست ساخته آقای پناهی. جمعه 14 جولای نمایش فیلم مستند شعری در خط زمان درباره فروغ فرخزاد ساخته آقای حسن فیاض با حضور داستان نویس، شاعر و نویسنده گرانمایه و ارزشمند ما بانو ناهید نیاکان و بانو ناهید کبیری و حضور آقای حسن فیاض از طریق زوم. Now I briefly introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Zhabiz Kazeminejad. Dr. Zhabiz Kazeminejad received her bachelor's degree from the University of California at Irvine in 1995, where she was a board regent scholar and a member of the campus-wide honors program. She received her medical degree from Drexel University College of Medicine in 2002. She completed her residency in general adult psychiatry at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital in 2006, where she received the Excellence in Outpatient Psychiatry Award. She's a board-certified general adult psychiatrist. Most recently, she has become a staff psychiatrist at Phoenixville Hospital, Tower Health, and assistant professor of psychiatry at Drexel University College of Medicine. She is also involved in homeless outreach. Dr. Kazeminejad's recent clinical interest involves the management of metabolic abnormalities and weight concerns, which is very important to all of us. Dr. Kazeminejad will be speaking about adverse childhood experience and the impacts on adulthood. On behalf of the Professional Organization of Iranian Americans in Atlanta, I extend my appreciation and gratitude to you for having accepted our invitation. Would you please start? But before you start, once again, I would like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Kamilia Alavi, who has made this lecture possible for us. Thank you, Dr. Alavi, and thank you, Dr. Kazeminejad, and we are all ears.
Thank you. Now, for some reason, I'm not as technologically savvy as I thought I was, so am I sharing my screen with you guys right now?
Yes, you are, but you can put it on slideshow.
Okay, so I don't see it when for some reason, it's not allowing me to see you guys at the same time. So I'm going to just go into slideshow here. Does that work?
No, it's not slideshow yet. But it's okay. If you're comfortable with this, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Yes.
So, so let's start. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm humbled by the kind things you said. And believe it or not, even though I teach a lot of residents, I'm a little nervous with this talk. So I apologize if I'm if I'm a little nervous. So let's just get started. So when it comes to adverse childhood experiences, I think that we've all sort of historically intuitively known that rough childhoods lead to not very good outcomes. But I think that it really started as a formal concept in 1998. So in the now landmark study in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, an internist by the name of Vincent Felitti found a strong graded relationship between the breadth of exposure to abuse or household dysfunction in childhood and multiple adverse health outcomes. And that's where the concept of adverse childhood experiences started. So what is an ACE score? So now in psychiatry, just like with everything else, what we're trying to do is we're trying to manualize or, make it objective, sort of the things that we talk about. In psychiatry, people have felt like it's more subjective than other areas of medicine, and we are trying to manualize it. So an ACE score is an adverse childhood experience score. And it's really just a tally of different types of abuse, neglect, and other hallmarks, of a rough childhood. And there is a roughly linear relationship between an ACE score and adult health outcomes. And it seems like the number 3. So a score of 3 is the critical number, although it does continue to go up linearly as the score goes up. What are adverse childhood experiences? So this, the common things that we talk about are violence, abuse, neglect, but where there's also other things that we don't think about as much, but also do kind of impact childhood, which includes witnessing violence in the home or community if you grew up in a very, unsafe neighborhood, or having a family member with mental illness, or dying by suicide. Now, that's not a complete list. This is the official ACE questionnaire. It comprises 10 questions. It's a screening tool that a lot of primary care physicians can use. We certainly use it in psychiatry. Like I said, it's a very graded response. With the higher your score, the more poor your health outcomes are. The National Institute of Health is really looking at this, and this is a special area in the National Institute of Mental Health of study. And why is that? Why is adverse childhood experiences such a specific area of study for the National Institute of Mental Health? So take a look at what happens with the higher your ACE score. Now, we all sort of intuitively know numbers 1, 2, and 3. We know that if you kind of came from a bad childhood, you're probably prone towards substance abuse, being victimized, or a perpetrator of domestic violence or depression. But take a look at number 4, 5, and 6. Cancer, cardiovascular disease, and obesity. It is a serious risk factor for medical issues. And I want you to take a look at the next slide. What are the top causes of death in America right now? Heart disease, so cardiovascular disease, cancer. So the top 2 diseases in America, the top 2 killers in America, adverse childhood experiences are a major risk factor for them. So this is not just a mental health issue. This is a public health issue addressing adverse childhood experiences. And some of the other things that we talk about, like Alzheimer's disease and diabetes, those are risk factors for obesity, along with heart disease and cancer. And finally, a major cause of death in the United States is suicide. And that is, again, adverse childhood experiences are a risk factor. So is ACE an epidemic? About 61% of adults surveyed across 25 states reported they had experienced at least one type of ACE before the age of 18. And so a score of 1. So each type is 1 score. Nearly 1 in 6 reported they had experienced 4 or more types. ACEs are costly. A 10% reduction in adverse childhood experiences in North America could equate to an annual savings of $56 billion. That is how much of a risk factor adverse childhood experiences are. So let's talk about why is adverse childhood experiences so toxic. Let's first talk about its impact on the brain. So let's start with the amygdala. The amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. It activates the stress response. When you're exposed to toxic stress, the amygdala enlarges. The prefrontal cortex, so while your stress response, so your emotional response expands, the prefrontal cortex, which puts a check on the amygdala, actually gets smaller. Toxic stress leads to a death of neurons, and they're more dysfunctional as people develop with adverse childhood experiences. Finally, the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the memory center of the brain, but it emotionally colors your memories as well. So it processes the memories with the mood that you experienced. And toxic stress changes our emotional understanding of our memories. It makes it more toxic. So this is another way of saying it, just in written form. So the amygdala, with a larger amygdala, you're going to have more fear, you're going to have more anxiety, you're going to have more aggression. With a smaller prefrontal cortex, you're going to have less moderation of your social behavior. You're going to have less control over aspects of your speech and language, and you're going to have less what we call executive functioning. So your ability to predict the sort of adverse consequences of your life choices. And the hippocampus, which consolidates your memory and colors the emotional aspects of your memory, that's going to be changed as well. Here, I want you to see what happens to the prefrontal cortex when someone's been exposed to toxic levels of stress. Take a look at, so each of these are neurons and these are connections. Oh, geez, I'm sorry. These are all neurons and these are the connections. What you notice is that there's so much less connectivity among the neurons when someone's been exposed to toxic levels of stress in childhood. This is a problem. I mean, the thinning of the prefrontal cortex is a serious architectural problem with the brain and how it impacts. So this has been such an issue that CNN in 2015 ran a story about, is trauma a disability? And this was the brain that they showed. These are the temporal lobes. This is the cortex of the brain. Take a look at how much less metabolically active a traumatized brain is. And this is very important. Now, this is not a pessimistic, I'm sorry, this is not a pessimistic talk. So we're just talking about the problems right now. But really, I want you to really understand the direct impact of the brain when we are talking about trauma. So how does adverse childhood experiences really impact the brain and so many other elements of the brain? It seems like there's probably a lot of different pathways, but the most significant pathway, as far as we are aware, seems to be its role in inflammation in the body. So it inflames multiple centers. So it causes an overactivation of the inflammatory centers. And the nervous system, the immune system, and the endocrine system, which is implicated in obesity and diabetes, are the systems that are the most sensitive to inflammation. And that's the reason why, at least that's the most significant reason why they've uncovered why adverse childhood experiences causes so much trouble. So here is a slide that shows sort of the disease burden and your ACE score. Number of childhood adverse experiences. So like I said, 0 and 1, there seems not to be too much. Going above 2 is where you really start to see the problems. Take a look. Now we would expect there to be a graded increase when we're talking about depression. But take a look at C-reactive protein levels in the body. C-reactive protein is a marker of inflammation throughout the body. Here is a graded increase in the metabolic risk markers. Oh, I am so sorry. What am I doing here? Hold on. I apologize. So the metabolic markers are sort of the risk factors for the creation of diabetes, for the development of diabetes. And panel 4 is really just a total disease burden, all kinds of diseases. Again, you can see that once you hit the higher your ACE score, the higher the total disease burden. So are poor outcomes inevitable? And I wanted to show these people because these people all had extremely high ACE scores. One of the most interesting things about all 3 of these people is that their last name is not the last name of their biological father. So Bill Clinton's biological father died when his mother was pregnant with him. Clinton is his adoptive father's last name, who was an alcoholic, and there was domestic violence in the house. Oprah Winfrey was a sex worker as a teenager. Vernon Winfrey, who was named on her birth certificate, couldn't have fathered her because he was out of the country. He was a military man when she was conceived, but he decided to raise her anyway. And Jeff Bezos was born to teenage parents. The father was an addict, promptly left the family, and he was raised by his adoptive father. So clearly, adverse childhood experiences do not impact everybody the same way. As much as they create a huge risk for many people, some people seem to be either immune or they leverage it in a different way. And this is the area of intense research right now, both in psychology, more so than in psychiatry. How is it that some people are able to become the next billionaires despite horrific childhoods, despite being sex workers as teenagers, despite growing up in a household where there's been domestic violence and alcoholism, while other people are sort of confined to a life that's really just utterly miserable, both in terms of mental as well as physical health. So contextualizing trauma. One of the things that's interesting about people who have had trauma and who have been very successful despite it is that they contextualize it in a very different way. They don't see it as a deficit model. So Maya Angelou, who also had just a horrific childhood, who died a multimillionaire, said, "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it." Nelson Mandela, I think we all know his history, and in South Africa said, coming out of prison, I never lose. Coming out of prison after decades, I either win or I learn. So he contextualized his trauma as a learning experience. The Dalai Lama, who was kicked out of Tibet and has lived in exile, said, "Judge your success by what you had to give up in order to get it." So this is really our narrative of what our trauma meant and what we learned from it and what we got out of it is really an important part of how we move on from it. So the old model of psychiatry or psychology when it came to adverse childhood experiences was a deficit model. The idea was that you're essentially, as Maya Angelou said, reduced by your trauma. The new model is a balancing model, and it's called resilience theory. So what does resilience really mean? It's a noun. It means the capacity to withstand or to recover quickly from difficulties, or toughness. The ability of now the second one, I think, also has some relevance here. The ability of a substance or an object to spring back into shape. So the idea is that you can bouncing back. So resilience theory is really more of a social work theory. We started off more in the world of social work, and it provides us conceptual framework for considering a strength-based approach to understanding child and adolescent development. So when we're thinking about what's going wrong with a person, we're also thinking about where the strengths are in that person. So we load the scales, and we can do this not just at an individual level, but we can also do this at a societal level, at a community level, at a systems level. Load the scales toward the positive. We know that there's going to be negatives out there. Let's balance it. So the latest that we have come to realize, and this is why we think that resilience theory has a lot of validity, and that we need to be really focusing on how we can improve outcomes for people who've had these experiences by leveraging their strengths. In world psychiatry, just as recently as this year, they found that just as ACEs appear to have a cumulative negative effect, protective childhood experiences also appear to have a cumulative effect on adult functioning, and they do lessen the negative impacts of ACEs. So this is a quick and dirty PCE questionnaire, the positive childhood experiences questionnaire. I'm going to be honest, I'm not as much of a fan of PCE as I am of ACEs, and we can go back and you can see. And the reason is because it's so subjective. Now, in psychiatry, we're trying to make everything more objective, but there's some things that you really just can't, like how you felt about something. But cognitive psychologists have looked over and over again, they've proven this over and over again, that our memories of our childhood are colored by a variety of things, including how we feel about our lives now. So when you're looking back, you know, and you're asking someone, were you able to talk to your family about your feelings? Well, the answer to that is going to be colored by the way you feel about yourself right now. So it's a much more subjective thing. With adverse childhood experiences, you either had a family member commit suicide or not. It's not that there's no subjectivity in that, but with PCE, it's a little bit more subjective, but we do still use it, and there is still a fair amount of validity. And we can go over the ACE and the PCE, you know, if we have some time afterwards, but I just wanted you to see that now we're not just doing ACE like we used to. But take a look at the impact of positive childhood experiences on ACEs. So this is somebody, the blue is somebody who had no ACE, a 0 ACE score. And you can see that the impact it had on positive childhood experiences is essentially 0. But now take a look at people who had ACE scores of 1, 2 to 3, and 4. And the impact that higher PCE scores, the impact of higher PCE scores on those people. In other words, you can really significantly positively impact someone's life if you give them more positive childhood experiences in spite of whatever's going on in their personal life, in their home life. So this I like a little more, although it's a little more cumbersome and it's a little bit less easy. You know, when we're thinking about primary care and we're asking questions, we want something that's fast and easy. This is a little more cumbersome, but it's a little bit more objective, which is the resiliency questionnaire. And it's a little bit more objective. So, you know, it says things like there were coaches and ministers in the community. So things that you can't just think about in a subjective manner. So what do we do? So in the past, the theory was that you've had adverse childhood experiences, you go into therapy, and then all these other parts of your life will get better because you're in therapy and you're feeling better. Now they're looking at it slightly different. They're saying that toxic stress is not something where you just go into therapy and fix. You have to fix all elements of your life, and therapy or mental health care is one aspect of the wheel. So it's a 360-degree circle, and each part contributes. So you start trying to develop supportive relationships, whether or not you're feeling good about yourself. And some of this stuff you can do without really, you know, being in therapy, getting higher quality sleep, balanced nutrition. And we're going to go into some of the biochemistry of that. Regular physical activity, mindfulness and meditation. Believe it or not, experiencing nature. There's a fair amount of data that indicates experiencing nature causes increased levels of BDNF, but we'll get into that. And mental health care just becomes one spoke of the 360 degrees of improved lifestyle that will help you overcome adverse childhood experiences. So now I want to talk a little bit about brain-derived neurotrophin factor. So we did not really understand how ACEs affect things and how other lifestyle factors improve things. Now we're starting to understand that at least part of the answer is that early life stressors decrease serum BDNF, mRNA, and protein levels. Now, for those of you who may not have as much of a science history, mRNA is basically the blueprint. So if they're checking mRNA levels, what they're really looking at is how much is that how much of the blueprint of that protein out circulating, because that is a signal or a sign of how much of that protein is being manufactured, right? If there's more of the blueprint, there's more of the actual protein being manufactured in the body. So abnormal levels have been associated with a variety of psychiatric disorders and specific differences in BDNF expression and epigenetic modification. So how much the DNA is open. We're not going to get into all the biochemistry of that, occur with early adversity. And like I said, early life stresses decreases serum BDNF. So going back to that 360 model of why those lifestyle factors affect how people do in adulthood when they've had adverse childhood experiences. Take a look at all the studies that show the different things that can be done to increase the amount of BDNF in the body. Intermittent fasting, believe it or not. And how does intermittent fasting help increase BDNF? By reducing inflammation. If you remember in the beginning of the talk, we talked about the role of inflammation with adverse childhood experiences, the higher levels of C-reactive protein, which are inflammatory markers. Exercise has been shown to be one of the most important things that increases BDNF. Sun exposure, sleep, and managing your stress. And I just want to say one thing about exercise specifically, because we're finding out that if there's one thing you can do for your brain, no matter whether you've had adverse childhood experiences or not, seems to be aerobic exercise. BDNF is considered the most susceptible to regulation by exercise. We don't know why. So that's an area of intense study. The combined effects of exercise and foods in preventing that was in an article written called "The Combined Effects of Exercise and Foods in the Preventing Neurological and Cognitive Disorders." In the Journal of Sports Medicine, physical exercise has been consistently shown to increase levels of BDNF mRNA. Remember, mRNA is the blueprint that helps increase protein expression in the hypothalamus, striatum, and the cortex. Remember, a lot of the problems with adverse childhood experiences comes from the cortical areas. So bringing it back full circle, adverse childhood experiences have long-term impact on all aspects of the life cycle. It seems to be mediated mostly through the inflammatory pathways, or at least that's what we know so far. The previous theory of trauma was deficit-based. Today, we are trying to be more resilience-informed. Positive childhood experiences do significantly mitigate the impact, and balancing the scales are an important part of what we should be doing. And at all stages in the life cycle, lifestyle habits can mitigate the impact of adverse childhood experiences. And what does the future bring? So if we know how much lifestyle factors can impact individual families, should we be building social systems that increase positive childhood experiences in our communities? We need to be identifying adverse childhood experiences early. We know which families are fragile. You can tell if you've been doing this long enough. Should we identify them and give them supports? Should we create a paradigm where people who are fragile families are not afraid of reaching out to us because they're afraid their children are going to be yanked from them? And we're creating a system where we're providing support to these families before the situation gets so far out of hand. Should we be building infrastructure that promotes lifestyles that naturally increase BDNF? Now, that's more of a public health issue for everybody, but it's particularly important in people who have adverse childhood experiences. So I think that's it. I was going to write the end slide, but I didn't. So I am finished ahead of schedule.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Can you unshare this, please?
Okay. And show. Can you unshare it? Can you kick me off?
Dr. Kazeminajhad, are you there? Can you unshare it for her? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kazeminajhad. A very, very nice and beautiful lecture. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I
Thank
really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. We learned a lot, although some of the terms were a little bit maybe too difficult for us. However, we got an idea. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you. Dr. Alavi.
Salam. Hi to everyone.
Hi.
I just want to thank, first of all, Zhabiz, my dear friend who is a member of my family. We talk almost every day. I've learned a lot from her. She's one of my mentors and one of the people who I go to for some advice. And her advice have always been really useful. And she's a very caring person, one of the most excellent moms on the face of earth, good friend,
you.
very loyal and very intelligent. I'm so happy that she came here to talk to us. I'm also want to thank Dr. Varzigar, who trusts me with my judgment about people who I suggest to come and
So
talk.
much. Yeah.
Thank you. And also the Qanun managers, I should say, Dr. Shariar, Haydari, Dr. Modarisi, Dr. Garmistani, Dr. Gorji, and many other people who are the engine behind the wheels for these programs.
Of course, you know that this is Puya.
Of course, I'm sorry, Puya.
Yeah.
Puya is a branch of Qanun, or no, it's independent?
Yeah, it is an affiliate of Qanun, yes.
Okay, all right. So
Yeah.
I've learned a lot from these programs, and I'm hoping that Dr. Kazeminejad comes for another lecture, and she has told me a lot about how people with mental differences, I don't like to say mental difficulties or any of like mental illness. I would call them mental differences. And she has explained to me very nicely that how these people have been very effective in human developments in what we have now, in technology, in healthcare, every science, literature, arts, etc. So I'm hoping she can talk to us about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I mean, I can touch a little bit on that, a little bit. So I mean, there has been a fair amount of research that has looked specifically at bipolar disorder and what they call creativity. A person by the name of Kay Redfield Jamison specifically, who herself is a clinical psychologist at Johns Hopkins and has a very classic bipolar disorder, looked at that, and it poses its own unique-ish question about what's necessarily in the best interest of the patient may not be for person, may not necessarily be for society, because a lot of times these people do suffer. Highs and lows are very painful. And before we had lithium, 36% of people with bipolar disorder did die by suicide. Having said that, I mean, I think the new term that we're using is neurodivergence. So we're saying that there are some people that from the time they're born, their neurological systems just work different. They just look different, they feel different, and they do often have, not always, but often have exceptional qualities. Now, there's always been this theory that's floated around that basically Silicon Valley was built by people who were higher functioning autism. So the people who weren't completely devastated by their disease, but had just a touch that they had exceptional abilities in math, computer science, that sort of thing. So this idea of neurodivergence, or at least the milder forms of neurodivergence, having an adaptive quality in human societies has been floated around very, a lot in society. And one of the beautiful things about this culture is that you don't have to fit in. You don't have to be, you can live in your niche and do what you enjoy doing and be your own person and live a very modular life. Like, Camelia knows that I lead a very untraditional life, despite the fact that I'm a physician. I go to work and here's my tattoo, and we all live very unique. We have the ability to live our own lives, and that's powerful in this culture. So we can talk more about it, but that's sort of the idea. Is neurodivergence is a strength. Now we're thinking neurodivergence is a strength, not a weakness for society.
Mhm. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. And Mr. Mostajabi, please. Mr. Mostajabi. Mr. Mostajabi, where are you?
Hello. Okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, there's a very bad echo, Mr. Mostajabi, and you're coming from two different sources.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Oh. Please mute yourself.
Hello.
Yes.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Better?
Now, yes, but before that, there was a lot of echo.
Okay. Now,
Okay.
question I have is, I don't know how it's related to this meeting, but I have seen people who have got mental problem. In many cases, they refuse to seek help, and this is very difficult for some family members, because they see that their loved one is suffering. However, there is no way that they can help that person, because when they ask him to seek help, he or she says that there is nothing wrong with me, and therefore refuses to seek help, and everybody will be affected by this. I wanted to see, I'm sure doctor has had situation like that, and I wanted to know what would be her recommendations on this. Thank you.
Okay.
So I think that the problem is twofold. I think that there's a cultural or societal problem, and by that I don't mean Iranian society. I mean a general societal problem. I think young people that with more emphasis on inclusivity and diversity have an easier time accepting that they might have challenges, because society is becoming more open to the idea of psychiatric issues. And then there's the individual piece, and the individual piece is hard because shame pushes a lot of that, and fear pushes a lot of that. When you're told that you might have something, and one of the interesting things about mental illness is that everyone tends to think about the 1% of people who have psychiatric diagnoses, that 1% who are pushing a basket, they're homeless, they're talking to themselves, they have like no functional status left. And whenever you're talking to people, young people, and you say you have a psychiatric illness, their mind directly goes to that. They don't think that there's a grade, and that somebody who's a professor of psychology at Johns Hopkins has been hospitalized psychiatrically. I've had company CEOs been hospitalized psychiatrically, and then there are some people who become completely devastated by their illness. It's been my experience with young people that there's not a whole lot you can do unless they become completely, they become what we call in the state of Pennsylvania, we call 302able. So they become involuntarily committable. When they are just kind of hobbling along, you can do what a lot of people with NAMI, the National Institute of Mental Illness, recommends, which is sort of force them to deal with the natural consequences of their actions without your help. A lot of Asian parents don't like to do that. They don't like to watch their children suffer a little bit to kind of deal with the consequences of their life choices. But there's not a lot of easy answers. And I think that there's, like I said, that individual piece, but I think that there is a sort of social stigma piece that we're thankfully working on, and hopefully it'll make it easier for young people to accept that they might have behavioral health challenges.
Thank you, doctor.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. And Ms. Farah, Ms. Fania.
Thank you so much for that informative lecture you gave it to us. I have a personal question. I'd like to know the pronunciation of your first name and what is that name is come from and what that means.
So my name is Zhabiz, and it is Farsi, but it is Old Farsi. My father got it out of Anam Name. He didn't want Arabic names. He didn't want typical names for his children. So it means Shole Atash in I believe Middle Farsi, like from Sasanian times. So
yeah, okay. Thank you so much. And Zhabiz, right?
Zhabiz, yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Farah. And Mr. Samimi, please.
Thank you for your presentation, informative. I want to start my question with an example. I remember years back in Iran, there were a program in effect for a while and then stopped. But I use it as an example. The program was eye exam for students in schools in rural areas. So there were some volunteers or people who participated in the program, went to far villages everywhere and examined with simple tools to check whether students have eye problems. And they were looking for two major problems. One was corrections, like glasses if they need. And the other one was infections, like, I don't know, in English, tarahum and other things, health, that can be prevented by soap or easy things. So the outcome of that program was so valuable. Many students who were labeled as incapable or weak found out that the problem was not for their talents, but for their eyes. They couldn't see the blackboard.
Sure.
That easy. And that program actually opened many, how can I say, for me was a good example. So I try to bring your example into your profession. There are so many people, especially in your presentation, younger people, that they are suffer from something that they are not even aware of. Now is my question, is there a program like screening people, especially in the schools or in other places, to sort them out if they have something like corrections, or example from eyes, or tarahum or something else, they can be fixed? Because without that screening, I think people grow up, come to adulthood, being an adult, and then maybe it's too late and years passed.
Sure. So there's always this ethical question. Anyone who works with children, myself included, are called what we call mandated abuse reporters. And mandated abuse reporters are required by law to call in if they think that there's something significant going on. And the definition of abuse is different in every state, but it generally falls into, if there's not enough food, some of the things that are captured in the ACE. And there's always been this ethical concern that, you know, how much do we get involved in people's lives? Like, say, for example, the issue of ACE, right? ACE has been very well validated in the last 30 plus or 20 plus years that it's been around. But the question is, do we have an ethical right to put an ACE questionnaire in front of every child, say, who is 6 or 7 years old, and ask them these questions randomly? And that's always, you know, when you're talking about something simple like eye exams and vaccination records, it's a little bit, you know, it's a little bit easier. Right now, the conceptualization is this idea of fragile families. So families that may be at risk for whatever reason. And, you know, can we identify them without kind of putting a bullseye on them and saying these are evil people? That's really what it comes down to is, you know, can we identify them and provide them support in the community or individually without really getting a legal involvement? Because that's always the fear for fragile families, is that there's going to be legal involvement. There's going to be people coming in and out of their house. They're going to lose their children. So those are things that we have to always address. Eventually, my suspicion is that adverse ACE evaluations are going to become a part of routine questions in pediatrics. It's just, we're just not there yet, because there's this, like I said, this balancing of ethical, your rights to privacy, and, you know, sort of the medical, you know, ethical and legal issues associated with asking everyone these questions, whether we suspect or not. Does that help answer a little bit?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. And Mr. Pureze, Dr. Pureze, sorry.
First of all, thanks for wonderful talk, Zhabiz John. First of all, Kambiz and Zhabiz are very similar name, and they're both Persian.
They rhyme, yes.
That's right. But I want to mention that Dr. Mani has raised his hand. He has been trying to ask questions, but so that's why I raised my hand, so to let you know, Dr.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
So it's Dr. I'm holding for Dr. Mani.
Very good. So Dr.
Thank
Mani,
you, sir. Thank you.
Yes, please. I was even going to ask you. I said, Dr. Mani, this is your field. You should be saying something. But I saw that you.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I thank you, Dr. Kazeminajad. You didn't need to be. The presentation you made was so comprehensive. That was amazing. Thank you.
I apologize. I didn't
really
know how
enjoyed.
technical I should do it, so I apologize.
Right, and I like the area of the two sides is people who are exposed to trauma get impaired. Trauma also could be a motivating factor for some of the people, Bill Clinton or many other who have been really, and the study showing that resilience that you alluded to is a very important factor. And about the mRNA and epigenetic, it's interesting, a study they did that the people who were exposed to Auschwitz and PTSD, that epigenetic effect, yes, their offspring also develop PTSD, even though they have never really have been exposed. It's amazing that how be affected by that. I'm glad that you mentioned about this. If you want to a bit on that.
So it's interesting because right now I'm doing a lot of. Or can I speak?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm looking at a lot of so we have I think there's an echo. That's what I'm. So I work at two places. First, I work at the Family Center, which works with pregnant women who have addiction issues. And the second thing is I'm doing a lot of studies on obesity because our medications pack on a lot of weight, and I may or may not go for my board certification in that, but I'm doing a lot of medical education on that. And we're finding that what we call these polygenic diseases, so non-Mendelian diseases that have a lot of different genetic factors associated with them, they tend to be very epigenetic as well. So if a mother is stressed and she has higher levels of circulating C-reactive protein, it changes the way the child's DNA folds. And through process that, you know, they call methylation, those stress hormones are opened up for transcription, and there's more circulating levels of C-reactive protein in the infants, which they believe is part of the process of why the offspring of pregnant women tend to have these changes in their bodies. Now, in obesity, now this is fascinating, but again, obesity is, I want to stress, obesity and adverse childhood experiences are very similar. It's actually a very similar problem. They have found that the offspring of women after bariatric surgery have a lower body mass index than the same women who had children before they had bariatric surgery. Same household, same exposure to food, same family composition. But if the mother's BMI was lower because she had bariatric surgery, her offspring are going to be thinner. So you're absolutely right. And this is an area of intense research, how epigenetics, how many generations it goes down. So if the child's DNA is changed, does that make it into the germ cells? Because the germ cells have an additional layer of protection. Does that mean that the grandchildren will also have that? And we're gonna have more information. But yes, the offspring of children who are exposed to substance abuse, even if they don't have, like, say, fetal alcohol syndrome, are more likely, independent of the genetic loading, to being substance abusers.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mahoney. Dr. Mahoney, I don't remember when, but pretty soon, maybe in August or maybe in September, he's going to give a very beautiful lecture, و خدا زن را کامل آفرید. Ladies, don't forget. That is the night for us, you know. Don't forget to come. و خدا زن را کامل آفرید. Okay? Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Mahoney. Okay. Now let's go to Dr. Asil. Please, Dr. Asil. Dr. Asil, where are you? Dr. Asil? Let's go to Dr. Modarisi and then we go back to Dr. Asil. Dr. Modarisi.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Kazeminejad, for a very interesting lecture. I wanted to ask you about social aspects of this particular topic. Are you aware that of any comparative studies that would show profiles of these kinds of, problems across different countries? I mean, you kind of had some good words to say about the individual freedoms and, the way people can grow up the way they want and have their own lifestyle. But like in societies like Japan or Scandinavia or Australia or Europe in general, are there comparative studies that point to, some social factors that come into the picture, particularly in this country where, with some of the aspects of the violence and the guns and the culture of the culture that the kids get basically to learn as they grow up.
So I don't know about specific like international studies that have compared different countries. I do know that in general, mental health outcomes tend to sort of follow socioeconomic guidelines, and adverse childhood experience, some elements of adverse childhood experiences may fall into that. Because if you come from a poor country, you're more likely to have experienced at least food insecurity or, diseases in childhood. Part of the problem in Asian cultures in general, and by Asian, I mean everything from the Middle East to the Far East, is shame-based cultures. People are not often open to disclosing adverse childhood experiences. So it becomes very difficult to know, how much they really had. Now, the good thing about Western cultures is that the West is exporting its culture. So everywhere people are becoming more Westernized. So in places where, people were very tribal and they kept secrets about how they were doing or the family dynamics, like say India is, and I'm just throwing a country out there. I'm not picking on any specific country. The younger people are more apt to talk about adverse childhood experiences than the older generation were. So we might be able to start getting better data about those things, about some of the things that happened in these, family systems. In the United States, we do know that poverty is a risk factor for adverse childhood experiences. And part of that, as you alluded to, is if you look at the ACE questionnaire, a lot of it has to do with just sort of where those people grow up. If they're living in a dangerous community, if there's food insecurity, that's two objective things that tend to happen more in poverty. It's just a fact. But it would be interesting to see if we can find a way to do ACE scores internationally and really have people in shame-based cultures be honest about the world they grew up in, the family systems they grew up in, the communities they grew up in.
What about the Europeans?
I don't know much about of course, Europeans would be honest, but I don't know much about, whether they've been looking at ACE scores and outlooks. We do know that most of the happiest countries in the world are in Europe, right? I mean, when they look at those happiness indexes, like I think Finland right now is the happiest country in the world. It tends to, go around Scandinavia. But I don't want to comment on something I don't know a whole lot about.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Asif, can you unmute yourself, please? What happened to you? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Good evening, Dr. Zhabiz, and thank you for a very unique and interesting presentation. You mentioned regarding some of the psychosomatic effect of this child neglect during the youth or childhood. And such as cardiovascular and cancer. I was wondering what would be the mechanism for it, in addition to probably deficiency in immune system. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that area?
So the person who finds that out is going to become the next billionaire. But then we do have a few ideas. And it seems like in the past there was this kind of mind-body division. And it seems like the blood-brain barrier seems to be a little bit more permeable than we had thought previously. It seems that the immune system, the nervous system, and the metabolic system are particularly prone toward inflammatory markers such as C-reactive protein. So in the past, the belief was that these people have poor habits, because we all know people with ACEs are more likely to drink, smoke, and have those types of poor habits that predispose them to poor health outcomes. Now we believe that's definitely true, but there seems to be a direct result of higher levels of circulating inflammatory markers that are also impacting, that are directly impacting these systems. one of the most interesting things that Oprah Winfrey once said is that I have solved so many problems in my life. Now, remember, this was a woman who had a horrendous childhood, but I cannot stop eating. I just can't. I cannot solve this problem. No, really, I can't solve this problem. I cannot solve, my obesity. So, and of course, the health outcomes that came with it, she was notoriously not active. So, we don't know all the details of how inflammation does that, but we have seen those circulating markers in the blood cells and the mRNA, which means that it's up and running, it's up and working.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have a question. Dr. Asif, you have another question? No? Okay. I have a question, regarding young people in school. In schools where they are dealing with young people, some of these teachers and administrators actually go too far regarding students' behaviors, and they label many geniuses with abnormalities, with mental problems, and they actually push them into abnormality. I have witnessed this, even in college, at the university in which I was teaching, that if a student, some students, know too much, and some students, because they get bored in class, they might, act differently. And a lot of, administrators label them with abnormality, and this, is going to kill their, genius abilities, really incredible abilities, in the institutions in which they are actually are supposed to be learning, So what do you say about that? And this is particularly true about the United States, no matter what you do, just one action would lead into a big, dilemma for the psychiatrists in the school or for the administrators, and they label these kids, with all kinds of abnormalities, whereas that student, who is a genius might get, bored in class and might actually do something that would lead the administrator to label the student as abnormal or mentally ill or whatever. What is your answer?
I think it's a very complex issue, and I'm starting to sound like a real politician because I'm not answering any question directly. I'm giving every answer has a vagueness to it, but there's a dialect to this. So, what you're describing is sort of like what I call the Steve Jobs phenomenon. He was a student.
Exactly. I was going to mention his name. Yes.
So he was a C student, but what I'm going to say is you have to balance that with another problem, which is that a lot of times, and I've seen this over and over again, parents ignore problematic behaviors in their children. And I'm not talking once or twice because of the fear of their child being labeled. And I'm speaking about this, and Camelia knows, I have a child with special needs. So I have been very deeply and intimately involved in the system, both as a consumer and a provider. So, and Camelia knows, Dr. Alavi knows, how the system I leverage this, the system has helped my child. Significantly. She, Camelia called her the miracle child just because there's been such an improvement. It's hard because on the one hand, you don't want to stifle. So, and on the other hand, if your child has a genuine issue, you want that child to get help. Now, in that system, in that milieu, a new system has come out, which I have a lot of mixed feelings about, and that's sort of the alternative or charter school system. Your child is not learning the typical way. The problem that I have with the charter school system is that it's so easy to hook one up, and there's not a lot of standards around it, and you're not entirely certain what you're getting. And I've seen a lot of basically functionally illiterate people coming out of the charter school system. So it's a good idea. It's one of those things where it's a good idea in theory to have these alternative options. It's not always going to end up the way, but you have to do your homework, and it falls more on the parents, and the parents have to be able to educate themselves. It's been my experience just from my own child having an individualized education plan, that these things are costly, and most schools do not want to have to invest in that kind of thing if they don't absolutely have to. But so I haven't seen too many, at least at my child's level. So at, not in a college level, but at like an elementary school or high school level, someone offering, an IEP or some kind of labeling plan to someone who only acted out once or twice. But I mean, we all know that people who are exceptional are not going to fit into the natural education system. It's a numbers game. So, you have to look and see, am I being honest with myself? Is my child the next Steve Jobs? Is he really just somebody who has that kind of potential, but is just not fitting in? Like Bill Gates was also failing. Or is my child a problem child who needs help, and I just don't want to acknowledge within myself for my own reasons that my child has some issues that need help? I mean, we know that early intervention works. The sooner that you get help for your child, the better, the more likely they are to have a better outcome. What you're describing often happens to boys. And there's a sociologist who wrote a book called Of Boys and Men, who really goes into this. They tend to have higher IQs. They tend to have less sociopathic traits, so they're less likely to be liars and thieves. I mean, I'm being very direct because there's a lot of children who are like little sociopaths. I mean, they really, they lie, they cheat, they run away from home, they do all these types of things. They tend to be just kind of quirky little kids who don't sit still in class, who don't pay attention in class. Maybe they're a little oppositional and talk back, but they tend not to be completely out of control either. And those are, so that's been my very non-scientific clinical experience with that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I mean, as a person who has also half a psychologist and half linguist, I have dealt with these students, in my classes, I mean, I had a student who was very arrogant, absolutely very, very arrogant, and she was getting D's all the time, and so I said that you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong. She said, you always say that I'm doing things wrong, I said, you're going to get better. I am sure that you're going to get better. If you listen to me, you're going to get better. And I talked to her, etc., etc. And the midterms, were done by the administration, not by us. And she got a B. And then when I went to her, I said, oh, you got a B. She said, it's because of you. It's because of you, And that's arrogant student, with that arrogant student, I was, she almost wanted to hit me in the face, when she got a D. But I was so calm and quiet with her because I knew that she had some family problems, I talked to her. I said, oh, whatever she was doing, and I kept encouraging her. I said, oh my God, this sentence is so nice. You can do better than this, But if it were the administration, they would say, yeah, she needs help, she's a crazy student or whatever, and they would make this student worse, maybe they would push her into suicide. That is what I mean, that they are not patient, with these students. They just, label them and they go with the label. But you are also right that there are some ones who really desperately need help. Of course, we have to help them, but there are other ones that can be helped just, with talking with them and encouraging them, and rather than punishing them, praising them. Sorry that I talked too much. Last person, Dr. Alavi. Last person, Dr. Alavi.
Yeah, since Zhabiz John did self-disclosure,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
about her daughter, that
tell her to come in here so you can see her.
Yeah, she was born in our arms, and I actually cut the cord of her second daughter in the hospital. So we are like a family that we
Are
are
you a
always.
physician?
No, I'm like a godmother, you know.
I know what you mean.
What
Yes.
I want to tell you is Ginette is a very lucky girl because her mother is a provider and also a consumer of these issues in school and with her clients, etc. So she had such a clear and deep understanding about the needs of her daughter. And we have observed her daughter to really flourish, to become such a young lady. Actually, last weekend, we celebrated her graduation from middle school with honors, you know, and that's exactly what she was saying, that I have also observed, that if
This is my cupcake. This is
Oh,
my
here.
cupcake.
Hi.
This is Jeanette.
How are you, my love?
Okay,
I
love
am-
one. You can go, but I just wanted to put a face to.
Hi.
She's beautiful. She's beautiful. And
No,
that's
not my phone. Out of here. Out of here. Out of here.
that's exactly what I have always talked about: denial. When parents deny their children's difficulties, they miss the boat. When they come out of denial, they become responsible. So maybe that's why some people, no, my child doesn't have any problems or any issues that I have to work on. Coming out of denial creates a responsibility. You know, so one of the things that I think we all have in a sense of a duty is to reduce, if we can, the stigma, but also make sure, train people or talk to them, friends, relatives, that look, there's nothing wrong if somebody has a difficulty. What is
Yeah,
wrong?
if somebody has difficulty.
Yes, if there's wrong, it's wrong not to pay attention to it and stay in denial. You know, and I really admire Zhabiz because I watched her over all these years, and I've seen that without feeling bad, being tired, complaining, or anything, in such a positive and efforts, with a lot of efforts, resiliency, she walked through these issues, and she's a success case to me. Thank you, Zhabiz.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I just want to tie this with one thing that somebody else earlier had said is we have to normalize mental health treatment. Somebody earlier said, you know, my son is an adult and does not want to acknowledge he has, and I said that shame is a part of it. I think and this is what I'm going to end with, we have to send a message to society and within families that problems are not the problem. The shame of problems is the problem. So, you know, if you can really say, look, we have this, let's move forward from it, there's a solution, then you're not having to deal with serious problems of your 25-year-old who does not want to acknowledge they have it. Now, it doesn't always work, but that's kind of what I'm getting at, what I was trying to get at. So,
okay,
time limit, so.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kazeminejad. Wonderful, wonderful talk and wonderful questions. And we learned a lot. Thanks so much. I hope to have you for another session on another issue. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for all of you for actually coming and participating in this lecture. And also, I wish you all the best. You know, we have a long weekend ahead of us, and I wish you all the best, you know, for the holiday that we are going to have pretty soon. And just again, I'm mentioning سه‌شنبه 4 جولای کانون به دلیل 4 ژوئیه برنامه نداره. 4 جولای 3 جولای ببخشید 3 جولای سه‌شنبه 3 جولای کانون تعطیله، برنامه نداره و 10 جولای برنامه فیلم خرس نیست. 10 جولای فیلم خرس نیست و جمعه 14 جولای نمایش فیلم مستند سفری در خط زمان درباره بانو فروغ فرخزاد ساخته آقای حسن فیاض با حضور داستان نویس، نویسنده و شاعر گرانمایه و ارزشمند ما در اتلانتا و در ایران بانو ناهید کبیری و حضور آقای فیاض از طریق زوم. Thank you everyone. Thank you for all of you who have stayed with us until now. And Dr. Mahoney, we are looking forward to your lecture in the future. Thank you so much. And I wish you a very nice and happy evening. And I wish you a nice long holiday that we have ahead of us. Thank you everyone, and have a nice evening. And thank you, Dr. Kazeminajhad, for your time, for the nice lecture. And thank you, Dr. Alabi, for have presented, this nice lady, nice, young, beautiful lady doctor to us. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye. Bye. Good night. نمیخواین برید؟
آقای گرمستانی